Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something extremely low stakes. Nothing stressful, nothing loud, nothing with a jump scare. Just history, drifting by, one date at a time. So go ahead and dim the lights, put your phone face down, maybe lower the volume just a touch. You don't need to remember anything, no quiz later. This is history the way it actually happened for most people involved. Slow, confusing, and slightly disappointing. This is history explained through timelines, which sounds fast and visual, but tonight it's neither. Tonight it's long and sleepy, and mostly about powerful people making deeply questionable life choices over several centuries, one after another, like an unbroken chain of poor planning. So let's start the timeline the way historians love to do, vaguely, farther back than necessary, with dates that feel solid but aren't, and with people who technically ruled the world, yet still couldn't manage their own families. We'll begin drifting into early medieval Europe, that hazy stretch of time after the Roman Empire politely collapsed and left everyone holding the bag. This is around the 5th and 6th centuries. Rome is gone, roads are crumbling, literacy is having a rough decade, and power is now held by a rotating cast of kings whose main qualification is owning a sword and enough cousins to form an army. The timeline at this point is less a straight line and more a spilled bowl of spaghetti. Kingdoms appear, vanish, reappear under slightly different names, and then vanish again. But one thing stays consistent. If someone calls themselves king, their children are about to have a very strange upbringing. Let's gently float over to the Franks, specifically Clovis I, born sometime around 466, because no one was writing things down very carefully. Clovis is important because he converts to Christianity, which is great for the church and even better for his PR. He unites a big chunk of what will later become France, and then he dies in 511, leaving his kingdom to his sons. All of them, at once, because of course he did. This is our first recurring timeline feature. The royal dad dies, the kingdom is split, the sons immediately hate each other, everyone is shocked. Over the next few decades, the Merovingian dynasty becomes famous for three things: long hair, brutal family feuds, and an impressive inability to stop murdering relatives. Kings are assassinated by brothers, queens are exiled to convents, children technically rule while adults fight on their behalf, which is a nice way of saying nobody is in charge. By the time we slide into the 7th century, these kings are still on the throne, but the real power belongs to the mayors of the palace, which is medieval code for the guy who actually does the work while the king vibes. This timeline detail matters later. Just quietly file it away. Or don't. It's fine. Now let's slowly drift toward one of history's favorite comfort characters, Charlemagne. Born around 742, king of the Franks, later crowned emperor of the Romans in the year 800, a big deal, a very big beard, and an even bigger family tree. Charlemagne expands his empire aggressively, but we're not going to get into battles. Instead, we're focusing on the domestic chaos. He marries several times, he has at least 18 children, possibly more. Records get fuzzy. Medieval HR was not great. His daughters in particular are kept close, very close, too close. Charlemagne refuses to marry them off, allegedly.
Henry II marries Eleanor of Aquitaine. She is brilliant, wealthy, previously married to the King of France, already tired of nonsense. Together, they have 8 children, several of whom rebel against Henry while he's still alive. Eleanor supports the rebellions. Henry imprisons Eleanor. Family dinners are tense. Their son, Richard the Lionheart, becomes king in 1189. He spends most of his reign not in England. He goes on crusade. He gets captured. He is ransomed. England exists mostly as a funding source. Richard dies in 1199. His brother John takes over. King John is not beloved. He loses Normandy, he angers the barons, he signs Magna Carta in 1215, mostly because he has to. He immediately tries to ignore it. Everyone notices. John dies in 1216. His son Henry III becomes king at age 9. Another child ruler, another long regency, another slow timeline stretch where adults argue around a small boy wearing a crown that's slightly too big. Now, while all this is happening in England, France is doing its own thing. The Capetian kings are slowly, patiently consolidating power. They marry strategically. They produce heirs. They survive. It's almost boring. Almost. Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, rules from 1285 to 1314. He is handsome, cold, and deeply committed to ruining the Knights Templar. He arrests them. He dissolves the order. He burns leaders at the stake. Very calmly, very bureaucratically. Shortly after, Philip dies. Then his sons start dying one by one, without male heirs. This leads to a succession crisis, which leads to the 100 Years' War, which lasts 116 years. Timelines are liars. But we're going to pause here. Not stop, just rest. The timeline has reached the early 14th century. Europe is crowded with royal families who are all related, slightly ill, and emotionally fragile. The Black Death is approaching in the distance, like an unwanted notification. And we'll get to all of that, slowly, very slowly. For now, just let the dates blur together. Kings rise, kings fall, children inherit problems they didn't ask for, and history continues doing what it does best. All right, welcome back. If you drifted off somewhere around Magna Carta, that's perfect. That's exactly where most people do. Tonight, we gently continue the timeline, now sliding into the 14th century, where Europe collectively realizes it may have made some long-term mistakes. We left off with royal families multiplying, intermarrying, and quietly running out of backup plans. And on schedule, history decides to add a little environmental pressure because the timeline is nothing if not passive-aggressive. Around the year 1300, the climate cools, harvests fail, people get hungry. Kings, of course, continue hosting banquets. This contrast will come up a lot. And then in the late 1440s, the Black Death arrives. We're not going to be graphic here. This is a bedtime channel. Just know that it spreads fast, kills a lot of people, and does not care about your family tree. Roughly a third of Europe's population dies, give or take. Records are fuzzy because, well, everyone was busy dying. The timeline doesn't stop, it just gets quieter. Kings die, queens die, heirs die. Suddenly, that fourth son you sent to the monastery is back in line for the throne, blinking in confusion. Entire noble families vanish. Lands are inherited by distant cousins who weren't expecting this kind of responsibility. And then, once the plague recedes a bit, the survivors look around and think, okay, let's just keep going. So let's float back to France. His son, Henry VIII, is not boring. Henry VIII becomes king in 1509. He's athletic, charming, and very confident that things should go his way. Over time, this confidence becomes policy. Henry marries 6 times. You know this part. What matters for our timeline is why. He wants a male heir. He keeps not getting one. He blames his wives. The church disagrees. Henry breaks with Rome, creates the Church of England. Because, obviously. His personal timeline becomes a loop of marriage, disappointment, annulment, or execution. Repeat. His health declines. His mood worsens. By the time he dies in 1547, England is religiously fractured and slightly traumatized. His son, Edward VI, becomes king at 9. He is sickly. He reigns briefly. He dies at 15. Then comes Mary I, Henry's daughter, Catholic, determined. She attempts to reverse the Reformation. She persecutes Protestants, earns the nickname Bloody Mary, which she would probably prefer you not use. Mary dies childless in 1558. Her half-sister, Elizabeth I, takes over. Elizabeth rules for 45 years. She never marries. She avoids war when possible.
She manages her court carefully. She becomes a symbol rather than just a person. The timeline smooths out again. But underneath, the succession problem is quietly growing. Elizabeth dies in 1603. No heirs. The crown passes to James VI of Scotland, who becomes James I of England. The crowns unite. The kingdoms do not, emotionally speaking. James believes strongly in divine right. He also believes witches are real and everywhere. He writes a book about it. He argues with Parliament. He spends money. His son, Charles I, doubles down. He rules without Parliament. He raises taxes creatively. He ignores criticism. Eventually, this leads to the English Civil War. Charles is defeated, tried, and executed in 1499. This is unprecedented. Kings are not supposed to be beheaded by their own subjects. The timeline pauses, blinks, and continues anyway. England becomes a republic under Oliver Cromwell. It is joyless, strict, and deeply unpopular. When Cromwell dies, everyone quietly agrees to pretend this didn't happen. The monarchy is restored in 1660 with Charles II. He is relaxed. He enjoys life. He has many mistresses. He produces many illegitimate children. No legitimate heirs. His brother, James II, succeeds him. James is openly Catholic. England panics. In 1688, he is deposed in the Glorious Revolution, which is called glorious because it mostly avoids violence, and everyone wants to feel good about it. William and Mary rule jointly. Then Mary dies. William rules alone. Then he dies childless. The crown passes again, carefully, nervously. And by the early 18th century, the timeline has learned something, sort of. Power is shifting, slowly, from monarchs to parliaments. Kings still wear crowns, but they are being watched now, closely, constantly. Which brings us to the next phase of the timeline, one with powdered wigs, deeply awkward family trees, and monarchs who...
In Spain, the monarchy returns after a long break. Juan Carlos I becomes king in 1975 after the death of dictator Francisco Franco. At first, Juan Carlos is praised. He helps transition Spain to democracy. He is hailed as a stabilizing force. Then, decades later, scandals emerge, financial irregularities, extravagant lifestyles, awkward headlines. Juan Carlos abdicates in 2014 in favor of his son Felipe VI and quietly exits center stage. The timeline, as always, moves on without commentary. Felipe VI inherits a constitutional monarchy in a modern state. His role is symbolic. His challenges are public trust and family optics. This is the new royal battlefield. Over in the Netherlands, monarchs abdicate politely. Beatrix steps aside for Willem-Alexander. No drama, just vibes and bicycles. Scandinavian monarchies operate similarly. Calm, transparent, well-liked. The timeline approves. Now let's drift east again. Russia famously does not bring back its monarchy. The Romanovs stay gone. The country moves through revolutions, regimes, collapses, and restructurings. Power concentrates again, but not under crowns, under offices, under titles that sound modern but behave very old. History repeats, it just changes outfits. Meanwhile, in the former Austro-Hungarian lands, the Habsburgs are reduced to trivia answers and surnames that still echo. Once rulers of half of Europe, now footnotes, museums, occasional interviews where someone says, "Yes, technically I'm an archduke, but I work in finance." The timeline is nothing if not humbling. Let's talk briefly about the last emperors, because they tend to linger in history like unfinished sentences. Wilhelm II dies in exile in 1941. He spends his final years bitter, reflective, and convinced history misunderstood him. Nicholas II and his family are long gone. The Ottoman Sultanate ends in 1922. The last sultan leaves quietly.
No throne, no ceremony, just a train and a suitcase. Empires dissolve, slowly, sometimes messily, but always eventually. And then there's Japan, a rare case. The Japanese monarchy continues uninterrupted. The emperor is considered divine until 1945. After World War II, Emperor Hirohito renounces his divinity, calmly, formally. The institution survives by transforming itself completely. The emperor becomes a symbol, a cultural constant, not a ruler, not a god, just there. Hirohito reigns until 1989. His son Akihito succeeds him. Akihito abdicates in 2019 due to age and health concerns. This is notable. Japanese emperors traditionally do not abdicate, but the timeline is flexible now. His son Naruhito becomes emperor, quiet, reserved, highly educated, a modern monarch in the most literal sense, existing within constraints so carefully designed that almost nothing happens, which, historically speaking, is a success. Now let's gently acknowledge something else the modern timeline brings us: visibility. In the past, royals lived behind walls, literally. Information moved slowly. Scandals were...
Meanwhile, back in Britain, the mid to late 20th century is an era of quiet observation and occasional mild scandals. Elizabeth II assumes the throne in 1952 at age 25. She's young, patient, and acutely aware that survival matters more than heroics. Over her reign, she becomes less of an active political figure and more a constant, stabilizing presence, quietly outlasting governments, prime ministers, and cultural upheaval. Her children grow up under intense scrutiny. Charles, now Charles III, is framed in the public eye as serious, cautious, and burdened by a lifetime of waiting. His early marriage to Diana Spencer brings fascination, adoration, and later scandal. It's a stark example of the modern timeline's insistence on visibility. Private lives are public narratives now. Charles eventually divorces, remarries, and waits patiently, decades long, to inherit the crown. Meanwhile, the younger generation, the princes and princesses, become familiar faces, not distant figures. Their choices, successes, and mistakes are documented instantly. Scandals and divorces, engagements and births, everything becomes part of a collective observation, quietly folding into the timeline as a record of human imperfection. Now, take a moment and zoom out from the personal to the structural. Modern monarchies survive not because they wield absolute power, but because they provide continuity, ritual, and a kind of comforting predictability. Their political relevance has waned, their symbolic function has increased, and they do this while their family trees continue to produce quirks, conflicts, and occasionally very public meltdowns. It's a different kind of history than in the medieval or early modern eras. Back then, dynasties collapsed under disputes over power, territory, or heirs. Now they persist despite, or perhaps because of, their inability to do much, and the public notices every moment, filing each one gently into memory in media archives. If we look elsewhere, Europe in the late 20th century sees a variety of small royal dramas. Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg manage stable monarchies. Spain, as previously mentioned, navigates post-Franco transitions. Monaco has Grace Kelly, who marries into royalty and brings Hollywood charm to European history. And Liechtenstein quietly continues, small and enduring. None of this shakes continents, but the timeline records it nonetheless. Returning briefly to Britain, the late 20th century is filled with transitions, ceremonial adjustments, and symbolic gestures. Royal tours, public appearances, charitable engagements, all of them serve to maintain visibility, connection, and relevance. The monarchy adapts, gently, without ever needing to dominate the stage. And so, by the end of the 20th century, the pattern is clear. Monarchs exist. Their families are scrutinized. They inherit roles they did not choose. Their power is limited. Their continuity is valued, and the public becomes part of the story in ways unimaginable for medieval kings. Across continents, the timeline continues quietly. Titles are passed along, abdications occur, children inherit crowns or step aside, dynasties evolve into symbols, authority diminishes, visibility increases, and the human element, the mistakes, the personalities, the relationships, remains. As we drift through this soft, modern stretch, we can notice a subtle contrast with earlier centuries. Kings once fought battles, waged wars, and died in combat. Queens endured personal tragedies, bore children relentlessly, and navigated deadly politics. Today, monarchs navigate public opinion, media scrutiny, and ceremonial responsibilities. The dangers are gentler, the stakes are symbolic, but the personal complexity remains. And that's what makes this stretch of history, this modern timeline, quietly fascinating. It's human, it's flawed, it's enduring, and it hums beneath the surface of everyday life,